guys, welcome to Telling the Told and Untold. My name is Tshego. Okay, so today we're going to be continuing with part 2 of the ABC killer. So before we continue with where we left off, let me just give a recap about what I discussed last week. So last week we were talking about how the killer operated between July 1994 to November of 1995. It was Trifina Mokgotzi's disappearance which led police officers to their first suspect in over a year. His name was Moses Sithole. So he spoke about how Moses Sithole says that he was abused by both his mother and his stepsister, how he was moved around between youth homes from the age of 6. He also claims that he was raped by a woman when he was younger. So we spoke about 3 women. The first one was Precious Khumalo, who was 38 at the time. It was the first woman that he ever raped, and he threatened her and said that he would kill her if she ever told anyone. The third person was Dora, who he also raped and threatened to kill if she told anyone. However, 3 months later, she saw him in a store, decided to call police officers on him and report the case. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison, where he was sodomized and isolated by fellow inmates. Once Moses was released, he moved in with a woman. Her name was Martha Ndlovu. Not long after that, he decided to dress up and claim that he was going to look for a job, when in fact he was looking for his first victim. Her name was Maria Monama, and her body was discovered on the 16th of July 1994. So after various interviews with family and friends, police officers finally thought that they understood how Moses would get all these women. So the first thing he would do is offer them a job. The second thing is that he would tell them that it pays a good amount of money and they can work almost immediately. And the third thing he would do is earn their trust. So he would earn their trust by taking them out for lunch or dinner and buying them drinks and food, and they would just talk about everyday things or their lives, nothing about the job. After that, he would call them again and say, okay, listen, you can start working tomorrow. So Moses would meet the ladies in a crowded area. They would then catch a taxi, and then he would stop it by a veld nearby. And it's not really anything out of the ordinary, because in a veld people usually use it as a shortcut and everything, so it was pretty normal. So they would get out of the taxi and they'd walk in the veld, and once Moses would see that it's clear there's no people around them, he would take out a knife and threaten them. After that, he would pull them further into the veld. So once they were there, he would assault them. After he assaulted them, he would torture them for about an hour, 2 hours. By torture, I mean what I mentioned in part 1 as well, where he would take any article of clothing and put a stick around it and kind of tighten it and loosen it just to strangle them, torture, just have fun with it. Or sometimes he would take the strap of a handbag and tie it to a tree and tie the other part to the article of clothing around their neck. And sometimes he would tighten it, loosen it, and just see how they would react, how long it takes them to go unconscious, sometimes gain consciousness, sometimes just see how long it takes for them to die. And sometimes the woman would get really tired, they'd get exhausted from holding themselves up, that they'd eventually just fall down. And because the strap is connected to the tree and the other part to their neck, it would kind of stop them halfway, and that would choke them to death sometimes. And if that's not enough, sometimes he would call the families just to torture them, saying that, oh, now you're walking on your daughter's burial site. It's just such awful things to think about, that someone could do that and gain pleasure from it. On the 5th of December 1994, Martha gave birth to their first daughter. And I don't know, it's strange to think that a man that's taking away so many lives could, be a part of bringing someone else to this world. It's really... By July 1995, 18 women had been found and police had exhausted every lead. So they were just, they just didn't know what to do. And now there's the press and just everyone, women are frightened. It was just a terrible time and they really had no leads. They had nothing to go on. So Moses would read news articles about himself and see what police officers had, what they didn't have, and just kind of what they knew about him and his MO, so how he would approach women and offer them jobs. So he decided to change that, and he used his past to kind of like determine his next step. So he decided to create a fake NGO, and it was called Youth Against Human Abuse. So he claims that this organization was meant to reconnect orphans with their families, and he would like send out applications to people and use those applications to draw them in, which is such an awful thing, to use something like children and orphans and just touch on something like such a sensitive topic to get women and to lure women in. In August 1995, Moses contacted a photographer and told him that he was looking for a children's home because he had 2 children who needed homes. So this photographer found an orphanage and it was called Safe Haven. So Moses went to this children's home, and outside the laundry room he found a woman, and her name was Trifina Mkhotsi. So if you remember, Trifina's disappearance is the one that eventually led to Moses' arrest. So Moses gave Trifina an application form and told her about Youth Against Human Abuse and told her about the amount of money that she would be earning. And at the time, Trifina had 1 child and lived with that child, her mom and her 2 brothers. So essentially she was the breadwinner of the family. And for her, this was kind of like a new beginning, not only for her, but for her family as well. And she thought that, she'd be able to provide for them more and just give them a better life. The next day, Moses called and said her application had been accepted, and she left to go meet up with him, and that is the last time anyone ever saw Trifina Mkhotsi. So if you remember, on the 17th of September 1995, 10 bodies were found of the women. So this is around about the time that Trifina went missing, and police officers discovered Moses's name. So around this time, the women held a vigil in Boksburg for the 10 women that had been discovered. So after this, Moses Sithole would call different news stations and newspaper stations just to find out information that they had about him that they hadn't released. On the 2nd of October 1995, I don't know whether it's 6 a.m. or 6 p.m., but Moses Sithole called the Johannesburg Star and said that he wanted to speak to one of the reporters. So once he got a reporter on the phone, the first thing that he said is, "I am the man everybody is looking for." And he further said that his name was Joseph and claimed to be the ABC killer. So Moses called a further 3 times, and he always spoke to the same reporter. So he kind of explained his life and said that he's killing all these women because he was wrongly convicted for rape, and he feels as though every woman deserves to be punished and kind of be punished in the way that he was punished, if not more. So the reporter would type out their conversations and she gave them to the police, and the police officers didn't believe that it was the killer. The reporter gave police officers the transcripts that she had typed out with her calls, and the police officers didn't believe that it was the killer. So they asked her to ask him to prove himself. And she was like on the phone, "How do I know it's you?" Moses then gave the location of 2 bodies. The first body he said would be found in a veld, and it would be under a piece of large metal. He said that he had visited the veld and he kept looking for the body, and he eventually found it under a piece of metal, and the woman had been there for over a year, because when police officers finally went there and searched and found the body, it was just bones. The second body that Moses led police officers to was in another veld, and he said the body would be found hanging off a tree. Police officers went searching in that veld and they found the body, and they discovered that the woman had went missing just the day before. The third call that Moses made to the reporter, the police officers were sitting in and listening. So he called the reporter, and as they were talking, he ran out of minutes. So I don't want to say airtime because it doesn't take airtime, but yeah. So the reporter asked if she could call him back, and he said yes. So she asked for the number to call on. She gave him a number and she called him back. So as she was as they were on the phone, police officers were able to trace the call to a phone booth nearby. So you know those telecom phone booths that's like blue and green? So that. So as the reporter was on the phone, like talking to him and trying to like keep him on the line, he kind of just went silent. So you know, she kept like saying his name, like Joseph, where are you? And he wasn't answering. And she says that she's like felt a bit of pity for him and empathy, and she just kind of like hoped that police officers hadn't shot him, because even though he had done all these horrible things, she says that, you know, he talked about his life, and she just felt sorry for him. And not that she understood it, but you know, she just felt sorry for him. The next day, on October 13th, 1995, police officers decided to release Moses' picture to newspapers. So because of this, Moses felt cornered and didn't know what to do. So he decided to call his brother-in-law, which was Martha's brother. And he called him and said, listen, look, I need a gun. And Martha's brother agreed and said that they should meet outside the factory that he works at. After he hung up the call with him, he decided to call police officers and let them know that Moses had contacted him. After this, police officers decided to come up with an operation, and they got a man to act as a security guard, an undercover police officer. So once Moses arrived there, he saw the security guard and he got suspicious and just decided to run. So as you know, the security guard was the undercover cop. So he ran into a dark passageway or an alley, and he kind of felt cornered. So he took out a knife to try and attack the police officer, but the police officer took out a gun and fired a couple of shots at Moses. Moses was shot both in the abdomen and the leg. He was immediately taken to hospital after that. So while Moses was in the hospital, a male officer went in to try and question him, and all Moses kept saying is, I don't know, you weren't with me. So the police officer thought, okay, listen, he goes after women, so how about we get a woman to come question him? So a woman officer came in to question him, and it worked, because Moses then started speaking about what he had done, almost bragging, and he got sexually aroused by this, and he started masturbating as he was telling the officer everything that he had done, which is, you know, like, you're so aroused by killing women that you start masturbating. It's ew. Once Moses was well enough to leave the hospital, he was taken straight away to prison. Whilst he was in prison, his cellmate, his name was David Schumann, somehow smuggled a camera into the prison. So they were sitting there talking, and David was recording his conversation with Moses. And, you know, just kind of asking Moses how, like, why he did this, how it felt to strangle someone. If I can find clips, I'll insert them right now. Boop. On the 21st of October 1995, Moses Sithole was charged with 40 counts of rape and 38 counts of murder. In court, he would intimidate the witnesses, you know, just by staring them down, laughing at them, shaking his head, but that really didn't stop them. They had DNA evidence that linked him to the murders, as well as the videotape from prison that David Schumann had secretly recorded. So throughout Moses's trial, there were women outside the courthouse that had flyers, who were singing. You know, it was just a painful moment. It was just painful. At the time of Moses' trial, the death penalty had recently been abolished, so he couldn't be sentenced to death. And the women outside were just asking for his head, and they just kept saying, "Bring him to us, we'll deal with him." And you know, it was just like, man. On the 5th of December 1997, Moses Sithole was sentenced to 2,410 years for 38 counts of murder and 40 counts of rape. To this day, 11 out of the 38 women are still unidentified, and police officers believe that Moses murdered more than 38 women. They just haven't been discovered, or they just haven't been linked to him. Today, Moses is 56 years old and is still serving his prison sentence. So that is it for the two-part ABC killer case. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!